Do 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 do. Well, guess what time it is? It's Grill the Priest. And you know what other time it is? It's time for a new theme song. So I get to grill you. Here's my challenge to you. Come up with a theme song for Grill the Priest. I've been doing my little riff on the Jeopardy theme song because I always loved that show. Growing up was great to get to all this arcane knowledge. But how about coming up with something original, something special that way for Grill the Priest, for those of you who are musically talented, or find some other song that you think would be a better fit. Anyway, so that's my question for you. So keep sending your questions to askfather@hfcmn.org. askfather@hfcmn.org. You've been sending some great ones in, so we'll try and keep tackling them. Here we go. Third episode this week, I might add. Busy week. First question. While talking about the Rosary a while back, an elderly priest told me he made up his own mysteries to meditate on from time to time because, honestly, sometimes he needed a little change of pace. He mentioned something akin to mysteries of healing. For example, the 10 lepers, or the blind people Jesus healed, the crippled man lowered through the ceiling, raising Lazarus from the dead, and even the healing of the high priest's servant's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane. Is this okay to do? Wow, that's a great question. So first of all, let me say this. You know, the Rosary is a very special devotion that Our Lady gave to St. Dominic, and those mysteries that have come down through the centuries are kind of primary mysteries to help us enter into the life of Jesus and the way that our salvation unfolds. But you know, it was just about 19 years ago that Pope St. John Paul II added 5 more mysteries, the luminous mysteries, wonderful mysteries that he thought filled a gap in that series of meditations. Are there other gaps to be filled? Absolutely. So I wouldn't say that these other mysteries would be things that we'd call mysteries of the Rosary, but are they able to be meditated upon? Absolutely. And you want to ask Our Lady to help you meditate on them? Great, wonderful, no problem. Some things that we think are kind of set in stone actually have fluctuated greatly over the ages. You know, we think of the Stations of the Cross as 14. I've been to churches in Italy that had dozens of Stations of the Cross. So 14 was just a number that eventually the church codified them at. So there are always more things that you and I can meditate on, and the more meditation, the better. So if this enriches your ability to get to know Jesus and to experience His love in your life, go for as many mysteries as you'd like, okay? You just might not want to do that when you publicly pray the Rosary with other people because it might throw them off. Next question. When we die and get our particular judgment and go to heaven where there is no time, since there is no time, and the final judgment is at the end of time, are we going to be experiencing the final judgment at the same time we're in heaven? Also, are you able to grow a beard during this pandemic? I think you'll look really cool with a beard on. Well, we'll see. So first of all, the particular judgment and the universal judgment. Particular judgment, as we call it, at that moment when the person dies and their soul goes before God for judgment. At that point, their soul would be admitted to heaven or, anyway, there's that other option. So, and on the way to heaven, most of us, let's be clear, are going to need some polishing up work in purgatory to be ready for heaven. So what I'd encourage you to think about is this. The universal judgment never renders a different verdict than the particular judgment. But the universal judgment, or final judgment, is at the end of time, as this question notes. But it's at that point that our bodies are raised and rejoined to our souls in a glorified form, whatever that means, whatever that looks like, right? Because remember, when Jesus rose from the dead, his own disciples didn't recognize him. So the glorified body, there's something special about that. But the universal or final judgment is when body and soul come back together at the end of time. You're right, heaven is with eternal and it doesn't have time, but the clock is ticking down here. So it's when time runs out down here. So we would not experience the final judgment immediately at the same time as the particular judgment. So I hope that clears that up. Lots of wonderful things to think about and make sure that we keep on the right path. Next question. Oh boy, here's a scriptural question. This refers to the Acts of the Apostles, and it's talking about the commissioning and ordination of the first deacons. Not always certain who are the Hellenists or the Hebrews, but it says somebody's widows were not getting their proper distribution of bread. Then a delegation is sent to the apostles, who appoint several saintly men to do the job, and they name each one. So this is important business, so important that we need to know their names. Those named folks were sent out so the others could get on with the praying and ministry of the word. Okay, here's the puzzler. What were these specially appointed several folks supposed to do when they were sent out by the praying folks? There's reference to serving at table and a point to the task. I'd like to hear what the problem was and what was their solution. All right. Well, I've already given you the clue to what who these men are. They are the first deacons. And the most prominent of them, of course, is Stephen, who becomes the first martyr. Their task is dealing with a controversy in the early church. Imagine that. Even in the time of the apostles. Well, we know it. Even the apostles amongst themselves had quarrels and things like that. But even as they go out and the church is growing, there are conflicts. The Hellenists are Greek speakers, all right? They could be Greek-speaking Jews, right? Or they could be other Greek-speaking people. But in this case, the distinction is between the Hebrew-speaking Jews, the Jews of that place, and others who speak Greek. And they think favoritism is at play. Those folks over there, the Hebrew speakers, right, the local Aramaic Jews, they're getting preferential treatment. And our widows aren't. We're getting the short end of the stick or the short end of the baguette, as it may be. We're getting short shrift on our rationing. And what this is talking about, of course, the Christian community always shared things so that no one went hungry. We shared amongst ourselves to make sure everyone was taken care of. And so what they're saying is the sharing is not being done fairly. And so we want to see that this is done. So that's why the apostles said, look, we're busy with important apostolic business, the praying and the ministry of the word, the preaching of the gospel. So we need some helpers to make sure this gets done right. And so they appointed those men as deacons. The word deacon comes from the Greek diakonia, which is service or servant. So that's the way this unfolds in the Acts of the Apostles. Hope that clears it up for you. All right, next question. This one's at Mass, and it's dealing with the Eucharistic prayer. During the first Eucharistic prayer, after you pray, remember, Lord, your servants, why is there a pronounced pause? Could you share what is prayed for? How should we pray during that time? For the living or the departed? Very observant. All right, so you know that the Eucharistic prayer, there are many different Eucharistic prayers. There are 4 principal ones. But then after that, there are Eucharistic prayers for Masses with children, Eucharistic prayers for reconciliation, things like that. But up until the Second Vatican Council, in the Latin Church, there was primarily one Eucharistic prayer. And that is what we call the Roman canon, because that was the Eucharistic prayer of the Church of Rome. Or nowadays, because there are multiples, it's called the First Eucharistic Prayer. You know it. It's the long one. It's the one where you go, oh no, this is the long one. It's the one that has all the lists of saints. Linus, Cletus, Clement, Sixtus, Cornelius, Cyprian, Lawrence, Chrysogonus, John, and Paul, Cosmo, Damon, all the saints, right? We get those long lists of saints in there, and sometimes people get fidgety, all right? Let me tell you, this prayer is beautiful. And it's not just one amongst many. All right? All of the Eucharistic prayers are valid. All right? All of the Eucharistic prayers do what the Church asks us to do. That transubstantiation happens. But some of the Eucharistic prayers have more venerable lineages than others. Take, for example, Eucharistic prayer number 2. That's the one you like. It's the short one, right? Let me assure you, it was not short originally. It is a fragment of a very early Eucharistic prayer, probably from the 2nd century, maybe even with roots before that. But it's a fragment that we have. It would have been much longer than what we have now. But it has ancient roots, and so that gives it a certain weight. Other Eucharistic prayers that are now out and about that can be used, again, they're all valid, but some of them are written by a committee. And don't tell me that something written by a committee in the 1960s has the same value as something that comes from the very earliest days of the Christian tradition. It has its uses, these new ones. Okay? They have value. But there's a certain weightiness that we need to assign to the ones that have really been at the backbone of our tradition. And the first Eucharistic prayer has, for the longest time, been the principal prayer of the Latin Church. And it has these moments where there are pauses, right? It has those long lists of saints, 2 of them, at the beginning and at the end. And you say, well, why? Why name all the saints? Because it's the communion of saints that we're part of. We have that connection with them. And then why pause? The same reason. We're connected to one another. The first pause, the one that this question refers to, is at the beginning, before the first list of saints. And that's where we pray for the living. If you look at the rest of the prayer with it, it then goes on to say, we pray for everyone who's here and for the people that they have brought in their hearts here. But that first pause, it's for you to add in the living people, the intentions you have. So I love the first Eucharistic prayer because it gives you a window right there for you to add in your intentions right in the heart of the Mass. The second pause comes at the end of that Eucharistic prayer. Again, it's tied to that list of saints. And this is a prayer for the dead. And so when we pause there, we remember all those who have died and gone before us, and we lift them up to God's mercy. So I hope that helps, and I hope it gives you a new appreciation for the first Eucharistic prayer, rather than just saying, oh, it's the long one. You can realize, no, this is the one that unfolds slowly and is so thorough that it reminds of all of our rich connections, and it gives us those pauses where I can add my own intentions in, right there. So, great. All right, the last question for today. This deals with last Sunday would have been the feast of St. Damien of Molokai if it hadn't fallen on a Sunday. So it says, how did Father Damien get the communion hosts to distribute at Molokai? Did they make the Eucharist themselves? All right, so this goes to the fact that Father Damien lived in quarantine for 16 years. All right, he was in quarantine. And he was serving the lepers there on Molokai, and then eventually got leprosy himself and died of it. But all through this time, he is celebrating Mass. Obviously, he's feeding the people spiritually. That's why he went there. But what we have to remember is, at this time, there wasn't usually a practice like we have today of there's a central organization where you order little communion hosts and they ship them to you in boxes, and then you take those unconsecrated hosts, put them on the altar at Mass, and boom, you consecrate them, and then they're the Eucharist. No, what has happened for most of history is the local community takes a little bit of flour and water, that's it, 2 ingredients, flour, water, and makes these unleavened wafers to be consecrated. So it's always been a local process until more recent days. And in many places in the world, it's still a local process. So that, I hope, answers it. So good questions. You're being very observant. I'm happy to have these and happy to continue to connect. So keep sending the questions in to askfather@hfcmn.org. God bless.